Yeah, so this week is going to be Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High. This was your pick,
Yeah, my pick
and
for this week.
I think I'm going to start by asking you a question, and that is, get ready. Here it comes. How this movie? How has it? How? What does it mean in your life? And why is this? Why was this your pick this week?
Um, well, this one was my pick because I've seen it tons of times. I think I own it. I've owned it in different formats. Um, I don't know. This one was like the first movie for me that was kind of like the naughty movie. It was kind of like um, let's see. So this came out in '82.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me 8 years old, and I had a babysitter who had a daughter in my class in elementary school, and she had older brothers and sisters, and so there was a lot of things in this movie that because when I would look at them, they would be like, "Oh, they're so grown up," you know. They go out, they listen to weird, not weird, but they listen to like rock and um, and so watching this movie, I've always kind of I don't know. I just kind of as I've gotten older, it's kind of shifted. My perspective has shifted into like more of the characters because when I first saw it, it was more of like, oh, look at Spicoli, man, he's the stoner, and I kind of identified with that when I was in high school. I
Right.
was pretty much just like that, and but
Nice.
then as I've gotten older, you kind of appreciate the storytelling a bit. And this came out in this came out in the allotment of like teenage sex romp movies, kind of starting with, I mean, if you want to go way back, it's kind of like American Graffiti,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the teenage thing, what happens in a day in the life of teenagers. And then this kind of is coming out of the 70s too. So in the 70s, from like 67 to 77, you had this decade of and if you want to watch the cool documentaries, A Decade Under the Influence, and it
Oh,
talks about all this thing. I highly recommend.
okay.
But it's like, in 67, it was kind of the end of um all the old guard of Hollywood was kind of retiring and selling off their movie studios, and so didn't have the personal the you didn't have the personalities that were making movies in the all up into the 60s, late 60s, and they were being taken over by corporations, which were in turn were like, well, we don't, we make chemicals, or we make coke, or we make whatever it is and that's the era of the auteurs, that came out, like Coppola, Sidney Lumet, Scorsese, all that. That's when you had this kind of decade where the movies were more anti-hero and more darker and just kind of more slice of life kind of stuff.
Okay.
And that ended with Star Wars and Jaws, which the studios came back in and said, all right, we know how to make them now, so you can just do whatever. And and we had Vietnam in the
Mm-hmm.
70s, and you kind of had that darkness. And I think that
Yeah.
these movies came out and that kind of lightened up the mood, because this movie still has 70s ties, it seems like. It was 82. I'm sure they probably made it in 81. So you're just getting out of the 70s, and they're looking for a demographic. The teens become this demographic where you had Porky's. This came out in 82, and look at this. The top 10 movies. You had Annie, Best Little Whorehouse, Poltergeist, 48 Hours, Star Trek 2.
Wow.
Then you had Porky's.
So
Was
Porky's
number
I have
5.
written down. It's a lot. You
Yeah.
talk about that naughty. It's a
Yeah.
comedy, but you gotta show them.
Yeah.
It's at that time where you're gonna. So
And that kind of took part in that whole, like, it was like when your older brother or your uncle, like I'd find my uncle's Playboys and be like, oh, I shouldn't be. What is this? Like,
right,
should I be looking at this? It was
right,
kind of in that same vein, because I
yes.
remember one of my uncles, because this was playing at Coddingtown Mall. Did you ever go to
Oh
Coddingtown
yeah,
Mall?
yep,
Okay. And at Coddingtown Cinemas in
yep.
Santa Rosa. And he was like, oh, yeah, I just got back from seeing Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I was like, Ridgemont High? Ridgemont?
Nice.
But yeah, it was one of those movies, and then it was kind of like I don't know. I just fell in love with it just because I think it's
How old were you?
it's it.
Sorry to interrupt.
Uh,
But how old were you when
no, no,
you
no.
saw it?
When I saw it, I was
Yeah.
probably like 10, maybe
Oh, so
11.
you saw it fairly soon after it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think because it was one of those VHS. Because VHS,
Mhm.
we got our VHS player probably at 82,
Okay.
83, somewhere around there.
Wow.
And actually, me and Jagar,
Hmm.
um, the first VHS we rented was Star Wars, Stripes, and Cannonball Run. Those were our three first ones. And yeah, but it was one of those movies that you just were like, maybe a friend's older brother has this, or maybe somebody's older sibling or whatever has this movie, and it was just kind of one of those movies that was like, ooh, kind of
Hmm.
naughty. How about you, man? How about when do you remember seeing it? Like, did you rent it, or when did you see
So
it?
this is for me. I didn't. We didn't have. I grew up in Forestville, and we didn't have cable out there at the
Yeah,
time, and
yeah,
certainly not in '82. But I think there was one person on the street, one of my buddies who lived a few doors down, who had HBO, and he had the box, the big box, the
yeah,
home box office that sat on the
yeah,
TV. It was like half the
yeah,
size of the TV. And we didn't spend a lot of time in the house, especially when his parents were home. It was like, oh, my parents are home, let's go play in the street. But if it was on, I would see certain scenes. And I don't think I've seen all the scenes, all the Spicoli scenes, of course. The Judge Reinhold's daydream that he has, that one. So as far as watching the
Well,
movie from,
I got notes on that too. We'll get
do
back to
you?
that, but I got notes. Yes.
Okay, you gotta lock the door, man. You just gotta lock the door. What are you doing? Um, I don't think I'd seen the movie from start to finish until probably sometime into my 20s. Until I was
Oh,
probably into my 20s. I don't think I saw
yeah,
it all the way through. But at this point, I had seen basically,
yeah,
what do you call them? Clips and like just scenes from it. And so I'd seen
yeah.
the whole movie. I just didn't see it all in chronological order. So,
Right, right.
yeah, I'm going to say probably 25, 20, somewhere between 25 and 30 was the first time I was actually, I don't think I've actually watched this. I know all
Yeah,
the funny lines because everybody
yeah.
says them all the time still,
Right,
decades
right.
later. But yeah, so that was my experience with it. Is but and
Well,
by that
that's
point, you mentioned, we said Porky's was the one that came to mind. The other one that came to mind, which is I think comes along a little bit later, was Revenge of the Nerds,
oh
where you
yeah,
had a lot of there's a lot of, I mean, that one's like
yeah,
suspect, dude. I mean,
yeah,
but at the time, and those ones were ones that I had seen as a kid.
yeah,
Um, so, but Fast Times kind of slipped through the cracks for me, and I hadn't really seen it all the way through. But it was fun to watch, and of course, since then, probably seen it, 15, 20 times.
oh yeah.
Watching it again this week to prepare for the
For the
podcast,
quad.
um, I was like kind of bracing myself for, boy, this isn't gonna hold up. But I really, you know I knew where the jokes were coming, but this time I was really watching it more from, who are these characters? Like, you
Yeah,
got a core
yeah,
group of characters,
yeah,
and then you have so many smaller characters that it's a who's who, dude. It's, obviously Forrest Whitaker is kind of part of the main cast. It's his Camaro,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
I had forgotten that was Forrest Whitaker. It had probably been that long. I mean, there's Oscars all over. Nick Cage, Eric Stoltz, um,
Anthony Edwards.
Anthony Edwards. Of
Jeez.
course, Nancy Wilson's in it. She's the
Yeah.
the pretty lady in the car. I think that's what she's credited as, because she's married to
Cameron Crowe.
Cameron Crowe, who wrote the
Yeah,
book.
yeah,
Now,
yeah, yeah.
did you read the book?
No, I haven't actually read the book. I was looking for it. I found it on Amazon. Some guys selling it on Amazon for like a shitload of money. I don't know.
Really?
Yeah. And who knows if that's real, but because, um, but yeah, I can't find it anywhere. I think it's just out of print because I haven't even seen it referred to. Usually when a book's like in and out of print, there's still some in circulation, but this one is just I can't find it anywhere. So,
Might be at the
did you read it?
library. I'll look it up on
Maybe.
WorldCat for you.
All right. All right. Yeah. There you go.
But
There you
he's
go.
Cameron Crowe's essentially the same age as the actors in the movie. He's only like 5, 6 years older than them.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know how he wrote it, right?
I
You
don't
know
know how
that
he
he.
wrote it. No.
Oh well. So I'm assuming sometime in the late '79. I don't know when exactly, but he went undercover as a senior at what is it, Claremont High School in San Diego,
Oh, okay.
and befriended some people and was a senior in high school, and then he wrote the book after that, and then he optioned it. Hollywood came calling, and he wrote the screenplay. But yeah, it's kind of stories are based on people and situations that he heard about in high school, in which you probably couldn't do now. I mean, I don't know if I don't know. Jeez, I don't know if you
No, you
if
couldn't do
you
it. No.
got to go back into high school for a semester. God damn, dude, I couldn't. I would just be like, "Ugh,
Yeah,
ugh."
yeah, yeah. I don't think they let you do that, like a 21
Yeah,
Jump Street kind of thing where you're undercover.
you have gray hair. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a family thing, you know.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Well, so I was curious because the opening credits say
Oh,
based on the book by
yeah,
Cameron Crowe. And I'm like, what? I don't think I'd ever
yeah,
noticed that before because you're too busy
yeah.
listening to the soundtrack. Great soundtrack in this
Great soundtrack,
movie.
dude.
There's everybody's in this thing. I think all of the Eagles have a solo. It's every one of the
Yeah.
Eagles, but they're all
Well,
a
Don
solo.
Henley and what's the guy's name? The
Well, you got all of them in there. You got Don Henley, Timothy B. Schmidt, Joe Walsh, Don Felder.
Joe Walsh. Yeah. Which one is Don Felter? Let's see.
Don
Hold on.
Felder's the lead guitar player for the Eagles.
Yeah. What
Oh, the song?
Henley? Yeah.
Oh, I'm not sure which song it is. It's probably something that's playing on the radio in the background. I
Yeah.
think that's the Don Henley
Well,
song is playing on the background. You
yeah,
got
the Don Henley one is the one when Stacy's trying to seduce Mark Ratner, and
right.
he's like, "You know what? I gotta go. My sister, her car, she gets crazy."
That's that's right.
um, but yeah, what you were saying, kind of, I wanted to pick up what you're saying about how this is an age of kind of like you did we didn't have cable either where I was
Hmm.
living. We lived a block out of town, so I don't know if you know Healdsburg, but you have
Yeah.
the 101, and then on one side is Safeway and the town and everything. Well, we lived on the street right on the other side of the freeway, and we just didn't get cable.
Right.
So that's what you did, is that you went outside. You went outside and played in the street, or you played
Yeah.
with the neighbors. And that's why I feel like this movie kind of encapsulates that, because you don't really see any kind of, I mean, you see teachers, Mr. Hand and Mr.
Right.
Vargas, but you don't really see parents. Maybe you see like a mom, or a
Well, that's a
reference
really
to,
good
oh
point.
yeah.
That's a really good
And
point. You don't see any of their parents.
you don't see really any kind of adults. You hear about Spicoli's dad, by
Yeah.
with his brother, but so
Right.
this kind of reminded me of like a real life Charlie Brown episode. You know how they never see the grown ups,
Hundred
and
percent.
I think that was just the time, and I think mall culture kind of came out of that, because what did you do? You couldn't go to bar. I mean, you weren't old enough to drink or even think about that stuff yet. Um, I went to the YMCA, or not YMCA, the boys club
Hmm.
sometimes, but there's a lot of older kids there. So I think at this time, this kind of introduces that whole mall culture thing, where you go to the mall, and you either get a job there or you just hang out there.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think that's why I think when I watch this movie now, I think it's a great time capsule, and it kind of represents those times, because what else were you going to do?
Yeah.
Drive around. You could drive around, but
And
you know,
the characters, the main cast of characters. I'm trying to think if they're all working. They're in high
yeah,
school and they all have
yeah,
jobs. They all have after school jobs. It's restaurants. Um, you've got Damone, who's a who's a scalper, so he's got a
Scalper.
job.
He's
Uh,
also a bookie. He takes
he's a
bets.
That's right. So he's got all the different hustles going on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the only one who's not working is Spicoli.
Yeah. Why don't you get a job, Spicoli?
They bring it
Why?
up. Everyone else
Because you
is
need
out there
money.
grinding, man. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what you did. Um,
And then you worked with people your own age,
yes.
and maybe you had like Dennis Taylor or Dennis Taylor, whatever, at All American Burger. He was like the lone. He wasn't really the adult, but he was like the manager.
The one with the
He had
beard, right? No, that was
one
it.
mustache.
Captain Hooks.
Show a little pride.
That's right. He took it very seriously. And Judge
Yeah.
Reinhold quits that job. He quits more jobs than most people have had. Yeah, he just
Yeah.
throwing stuff out the window.
Well, he had a car payment, dude. 6 more months.
That's exactly right.
And what a
And
car that was.
speaking of Damone, what I noticed about Damone, Mike Damone, is I don't know if he's trying to. So this movie's set. It's but you said it was he went to Claremont in Claremont High in San Diego. This movie's filmed in the Valley. It's filmed
Yeah.
in like Van Nuys, North
Like
Hollywood.
San Fernando Valley somewhere.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you could. I mean, the only one who's like a Valley. There's no Valley girls at this point, but
Right.
I mean,
Right.
Spicoli is a Valley guy. I
Right.
mean, he's got that surfer. No way, man. And everything he says is funny, right? He's there for the. But Spicoli has this kind of New York. He's got like a Brando thing going that I was like, is he trying to do like like a Marlon Brando?
What do you mean in
Uh,
terms of like his
Godfather?
acting, like his
Yes,
approach? Oh
yes. And
yeah,
the way
yeah,
he's talking, he's got he sounds like he's got his jaws like out like 6 inches. The way he's talking, yeah, yeah. And I understand
that's
that he is a scalper and he's a bookie, and it's all.
uh
But I was like,
oh
and I
Timon.
don't
You're
think I've
talking about,
seen him in anything else since then. I'm sure
yeah. I
he's
think he was in like Hunter or Knight Rider or something. I think he just did like
sweet.
bit parts in that.
Okay.
But yeah, he's the interesting character because he's the one that he has the five what is it, the 5 points to dating. And
Yes.
oh, I didn't write him down. I should have wrote him down. But and he has, the attitude, man. You
Mm-hmm.
use your face, you use your body, you use everything. And yeah, he was kind of like you kind of I think as I've gotten older, my perspective on him has changed as well. Is like because at first you're like, oh, that's the cool guy. He's one of the cool guys. But then
Yeah.
you kind of realize like he's kind of a he's kind of a shady kind of dude. He kind of fucks over his friend and
He's supposed to be this
oh
he's got all the tips and tricks, and same
yeah,
with Phoebe Cates' character. She knows how to do, she's teaching Jennifer Jason Leigh's
oh yeah,
character. Here's how you do it right. And as it turns out, neither of them have had any experience in any of
right.
this. They're just making it up.
That's
They're
a good
total
point.
fake. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something I wanted to kind of eventually bring up is like because those two character arcs in that story, you know, because was it Linda refers to her boyfriend in Chicago? I forget his name. I didn't write it down, but
Oh, right.
um yeah,
Right.
and she's kind of like this know-it-all kind of experience, and you kind of have that with Damone. And then at the end of the movie, at the dance, you have them two kind of switching their roles because you have Linda crying in the bathroom, and then you have Damone kind of coming up to Mark and being like, "Sorry,
Right.
sorry, I took your girl," and that character switch or that switch that's very interesting. I just noticed that when I watched it this week,
I did
and
too.
and being, oh wow, I never noticed that before. So yeah, that's a good point.
It reminded me of I'm like, so I mean, the only romantic interaction Phoebe Cates' character has is in a daydream
Yeah,
from Judge Reinhold's character. And
I
she's got, oh,
remember.
here's what you do. Oh, he usually, 30, 40 minutes. Oh, I thought you said it was, or 20, 30 minutes. Oh, I thought you said it was 40 minutes. Oh, yeah, 40 minutes. And that's when I was like, oh, she's not
Yeah.
done any of this.
Yeah. Well, and
And
also, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
well, I was just going to say, it reminded me of another 80s movie where, other than the dozens of women in the Niagara Falls area, where, right? This
Yeah.
isn't, and they're pulling it off. Everyone just assumes, oh, this is, Mr.
Yeah.
Debonair, and look at all
Uh,
this experience. He's strutting around, got all the confidence, but is completely making all of this up.
yeah. Right. Well, and I think the reactions to those, um, because you have like when Linda's crying in the bathroom and saying, oh, thanks for cheering me up. Let's go. And she leaves off camera. And then you see Stacy's reaction, which is kind of the eye roll. And then you fast forward to Damone apologizing. And actually, no, it's when he's at the end when he's asking State or when Stacy's asking him, "Hey, here's a picture of me. Call me this summer." And then she's all Stacy, and then she kisses him and leaves, and he's just like, and you kind of cements that whole character arc right there.
Mm-hmm.
That switch, which is interesting. That's cool, man. That's a cool point, and that's something that I just, like I said, I just thought of or saw this last time. Um, I wanted to talk about kind of where the teen movie kind of goes from this because you have which came out the same year, The Last American Virgin, you have Porky's, you have this movie, and it's the beginning of the Reagan era, right? So you have all this kind of um, raunchy, like Losing It, with Tom Cruise.
Oh, right.
You have kind of all this raunchy teen, and by '84, his second term, you start to see kind of the mellowing out, which brings us, I think, to John Hughes.
Mm-hmm.
And which my hot take, or maybe it's not a hot take, I don't know, but I kind of think John Hughes kind of uh what's the word, vanillaized the kind of teen movie because as much as I love John Hughes, I love his movies, I loved all his movies, watched them all, but now the teen comedies become more about, I mean, because you look at Breakfast Club and you compare
Yep.
it to this movie. What would you how would you compare the two? Would you say that they're just on equal footing, or would you say that, because I think the Breakfast Club is a little, I mean, it touches on some weird or progressive themes, but I don't think it really kind of, it's all talk and, they're in the library all day. So, but I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah. It's, I mean, the coming of age movies were really coming up at that time during the 80s. You're right. It's,
Yeah.
the John Hughes movies, I think most of those are high school kids
Yeah.
going through it. And, they could be, the Breakfast Club could be a play. If
Yeah.
you didn't know, I mean, it all takes place in the library. I mean, the characters don't really move from that room. So it is all, there's drugs. Drugs are, and you bring up Reagan. I mean,
Yeah.
you remember Reagan's second term was a lot of just say no from
Right.
Reagan, and these there's people smoking grass in all of these movies. It's really kind of
Well,
artists that they really get into. But this was
yeah.
during the I mean, Reefer Madness was kind of coming back, and you didn't see a lot of. I don't
Yeah.
think you see them actually smoking in Fast Times. No, in the car they're driving around when Spicoli wrecks Forrest Whitaker's car. I think they're smoking in that one, but otherwise you
Yeah.
see just clouds of smoke coming out of the van. You
Right.
don't see a lot of active drug use. It's a lot of talking about it and a lot of being on them, but you don't
Right.
really see a lot of that. Breakfast Club was similar in that they went to the locker and got it out, and and then they're all actively smoking in that one. To
A
the
chip cannot hold the smoke.
right. And
Yeah.
so, but Hughes's movies were all it was vanillaized, but they were all rated R. So
Right.
he went from maybe we don't need to show boobies in every movie from just to get guys into the theater because that's really all it was. You don't need to have
Right.
um, Porky's is that's the whole point of the movie. I think. I
Yeah.
don't know if there's a lot of story arc going on in any of those, and of
No.
course they made 4 or 5 of those. Um, I don't know that one's one that really holds up.
Yeah.
If we get
I
to
think that's
episode 150, maybe we cover Porky's, but we'll put that aside for right now.
well, I think that's why Fast Times stands out because I think in the era of those type of movies, I think this Fast Times for me was more. It had story and it had characters and it had characters that weren't kind of they weren't like it wasn't exploit. What's the word? Exploited. How do you say that? Exploitive. I don't know. They weren't exploited. I don't think so. Anyways, because you kind of you have Stacy and she goes through all these things,
Hmm.
and it's kind of shocking because she's 15 years old and she's going through all these things that um,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
it,
She's going through things. I mean, they bring up some big. There's some heavy duty stuff going on here,
oh
right?
yeah, like
You know,
sex, abortion, but
abortion,
it, but
right?
it, but it does, but it introduces these things, and it doesn't really judge it, or it doesn't really. It's allowed to kind of to exist in this because that's just probably how, um, like Amy Heckerling was saying in an article that I read, she just wanted to do it as you would handle it in life. You know, there isn't this big hoopla or judgment on it. It's just how she handles it,
Right.
and I think that that's kind of the major turning point in that movie, anyways, about um, Stacey Storiak. But also, too, I wanted to kind of get back to the whole Reagan second term thing
Yeah.
because at that time you had Tipper Gore too as well with the PMRC, is that what it is?
Yep. Yep.
Starting to do that with music, so you would start to see this. I feel like it kind of bled into the films as well, and that's why I think with a lot of John Hughes, although you're right in terms of you don't need to show boobies and
Yeah.
whatever. Um, you start to introduce a lot of the parents into the storyline. You start to introduce love, but I don't know. Have you seen that movie, The Wildlife? I think it's called The Wildlife. It's supposed to be kind of like the sequel to Fast Times,
No.
unofficially,
No.
because
No.
I think Cameron Crowe wrote that as well,
Okay.
and it has Chris Penn, and
Nice.
it takes a and he does kind of like Sean Spicoli kind of rip off, but
Does he really?
it's kind of like it was kind of like the movie about the kids after they graduate high school and they move in to like an apartment, or they're working and they get an apartment, and it was that time in your life. um what did you do after you got out of high school? Did you go to college, or
Yeah.
did you just
Yeah.
work?
I went to.
Yeah,
Well, I worked more than I went to school. I went to the JC, but um, I didn't. I wasn't a very good student
yeah,
right away. I just would get a bunch of different jobs. It would be not unusual for me to have two, sometimes three jobs at a time where they're all part
yeah,
time. But
yeah, yeah.
that was just for gas money, and I
To
didn't move out
eat.
of the house until I was in my probably I want to say early 20s, 22 probably. So stayed at home. My brother was still in high school. Uh,
Yeah,
and, the idea of, just, yeah, just money for driving around, hanging out with friends, doing a lot of that,
yeah,
really kind of rudderless. Um, Go to school, not like a class, forget to drop out of it, flunk it, then be put on academic probation, start that whole cycle over again.
yeah.
That's
That
that.
was me.
Yeah,
I was totally like that, dude.
yeah,
um Let's see what I got some notes here. Yeah, you touched on it too. That the actors that are in this movie.
right.
Um, I mean, it was sort of like a boom, in the actors. It was like right before the Brat Pack, and you had Sean Penn. But check this out, dude. Did you know they considered Tom Hanks for this for a part in this movie? I
No,
don't know
who?
which part.
Oh, okay,
I don't know which part, but they considered Tom Hanks and Matthew Broderick for Damone.
okay, wow.
Can you picture?
He would have played it like Ferris Bueller, though.
Probably. I
You
mean, there's
know,
probably a lot of Damone in that. Yeah.
there's, kind of and that the title. Well, we can talk. Put a pin in that. You had mentioned
Okay.
so going back to just the 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 the, the actors, the characters in Fast Times really don't have parental figures. They don't really care what their parents are doing.
Right.
They if they're working and they're motivated, they're self motivated in doing this.
Right.
Like Judge Reinhold, 4 more payments. You know,
Yeah.
he's on it,
Yeah.
man. This car's
Yeah.
almost his, and he's helping other people get jobs. Oh, I'll talk to Mister So and So for you.
Right.
You
Right.
know, on the first day of school, very organized, very driven. And in Breakfast Club, they're all concerned about what their parents think of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a lot of
And
pressure being put on them by their parents. This movie is not that.
right.
They're putting a pressure on
Oh
themselves.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because I think that's a good point. That's interesting because I was thinking that the role of all these characters that when they have those jobs, I remember when the way I got my first job was my aunt was like I think 13 or 14, I can't
Nice.
remember it, and she was like, "Why don't you get a job at Roundtable?" And I wasn't even thinking about it, so I was just like, and it was summer, and I was like, okay. And so I went, she goes, well, I know the manager there, so I'll talk to her. So I was like, okay. And so I went and talked to her. She's like, yeah, all right, yeah. And I think I worked Fridays. I worked one weekend, like a Friday night or a Saturday night, and then I worked 2 days in the week from 5 to 9 after school. And I just thought it was the coolest thing because every 2 weeks I would get like $200, $300, and it was like I was still living at home,
Mm-hmm.
so I would just save my money and I'd buy a ton of weed and
Right.
but yeah, and I think the characters in this in Fast Times, that's kind of the same thing. They're not doing it because they're struggling financially or whatever. They don't really need to work. It doesn't seem like, anyways, and so they're just kind of like in that age of like, well, okay, I guess I'll get a job. My friends are getting jobs, so I want to hang out with my friends, and that's
Right.
pretty much because I worked with a couple people from my high school, and it was just a hangout, and but we made pizzas and worked and all that, but it was still like, so it was this age of like you didn't really have a lot of bills or any bills, and when I got all this money and I didn't know what to do with it, so I'd buy like a VCR or I'd buy a stereo or I'd buy like CDs. CDs were just coming out at the time, and so and looking at the characters in this movie, I feel like that was just part of it. It was just like what's part of the hang. We work at the mall. A lot of the jobs or food court or like Ratner, he was working at the movie theaters, and so I think yeah, it was just a great time to kind of work and hang out with your buddies.
That's right. The movie theater. That's the opening scene of the
Yeah,
movie, and the two young kids. I want to like get you got for front 4 rows.
yeah,
Interesting note about those two kids that are buying the tickets off of Damone at the movie theater.
yeah,
The shorter of the two kids.
yeah.
A lot of people don't know this. A young James Gandolfini. Look that up.
What?
No, but there are a lot of cameos, and there are a lot of cameos in this. Um,
I always gotta look out for you, man. I always gotta
I,
look in your eye and be like, "What?"
I wanted you to go to IMDb while we were on this thing. And go, hang on, that can't be right. No, it's not. But so they're
Oh,
all working in high school. You had like you said, you're what 13, 14. You're working at Round
yeah,
Table. I was washing dishes um, at the restaurant in town at sophomore year and junior year.
yeah,
I was washing
yeah,
dishes. I mean, they weren't a lot of hours. You didn't get a lot of
yeah,
hours, but I wasn't old enough to drive. I'd have to get rides to work.
yeah, yeah. Me too.
And that wasn't unusual. A lot of dishwashing jobs.
Yeah.
Worked at the little baseball card shop that we had in downtown Forestville,
Oh, okay.
and that was my junior or senior year. I can't remember, but at that point we were starting to get pagers.
Oh,
Remember pagers?
yeah. I had
It
one.
was it
I
was $8 a month for that pager bill.
yeah,
It went from
yeah.
6 to 8 at one point when we had them, and I was responsible for paying that.
I
Uh,
didn't get my first pager till like '99. I was late to the pager game, but
Oh
I
boy,
had
yeah,
friends
no, we
that
all
had
had
them.
pagers out in the
Yeah.
river. Yeah, Guerneville, Monterey, we all had pagers.
Uh,
And so we were all wearing them at school. They were. That was like for the teachers didn't. Whoa, whoa! Why do you guys have all? Whoa! They didn't. Can't have your pager at the. Or they're just making up rules as they went along.
yeah.
The
Yeah.
technology was kind of like, why do you guys? We don't need the pagers. We're all here today, so we don't
Yeah.
need them. But you got to have it turned inside out with the clip showing on your silk
Yeah.
tab jeans. As long as you had all those going, you were fine. Uh,
That was like me and a checkbook. I got a checkbook when I was like 15 or so.
yeah.
And I thought, oh, yeah. And I would put it on my desk and, I had this like leather cover for it. And then that didn't work anyways. I
And
mean, all the girls.
$14 in the bank. You're like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I had $100 in there. Whew.
nice.
Yeah. Smoking. Guerneville.
Guerneville, yeah,
Forceville.
yeah.
Yeah. How was that like in the late 80s? Forestville.
Forestville?
Yeah.
Well, there's absolutely zero to do. Not unlike there is today. I mean, there's more to do now. I mean, people are going. There's this great boy. They've got the best pizza place right downtown, and
Uh,
I'm like, yeah, I grew up literally one block from that place. It used to be the gas station, and now it's like some of the
oh,
best pizza in West County. Um, I mean, nothing to do. So you would just get together, hang out on the river, go down to
yeah.
Steelhead Beach,
Okay.
which is the big. I forget what it. I think it might be called Steelhead. It's the big one that everybody comes up from the city. You got to get there early down by Burke's Canoes.
Burst. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's that big beach that was just open and deserted, and people used to
Oh,
live down there.
yeah.
Lots of a bivouacking going on down there on the river. And we would just go down there and just throw rocks in the river and whatever high school kids do, drink a 40.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and you're in
That's
Healdsburg.
what.
You had more to do in Healdsburg. You guys had a Safeway, man.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, you guys. Yeah. How far was Guerneville? It's like
Well, it seemed like
20 minutes.
100 miles away, but it was
Yeah.
it takes you between 10 and 15 minutes to get there
Yeah.
from Forestville.
Yeah. Like we had Safeway. Well, dude, I go back now to Healdsburg, and it's nothing like it was when I was growing up, and that's one of the things that I think my buddy before he passed away, Carlos, we grew up, or he grew up around the block from me,
Mm-hmm.
and he was telling me like 10 years ago, he was like, man, I don't like even going to Hillsburg anymore. I walk around and I say hi to people and they just give me the, like dirtiest looks and they don't, they
Hmm.
just kind of are like, hmm. And so I was like, whatever, and then I went probably the last 5 years. I'll go down there to visit I still have family down there, and I would hang out, and it was just like I remember when there was, you know, where all the Mexicans hung out because my grandpa used to hang out with them, and they would hang out on the square, and
Mm-hmm.
and there was a bunch on the square. There was a bunch of mom and pop stores.
Mm-hmm.
Salami Tree was a popular. We had an Arctic Circle back in the day, and now it's just all wine. It's all
Right.
wine and boutiques
Yep.
and things that's stores that sell you things for like $1,000, and you're just like, hey.
Well, there's a lot of
So it's
Michelin stars in Healdsburg now. My
oh,
God.
is there? I didn't know
Oh
that.
yeah. I mean, it's like restaurant heaven. My Christina's brother and his wife. So they come down, and sometimes they'll come down from Fair Oaks,
Yeah,
and they'll spend the weekend in Healdsburg, not even tell us. And we're like, "Wait, you guys were in town? You didn't even like?" And they're like, "Oh, we were just kind of doing our thing." And we
yeah,
love Healdsburg. Healdsburg's great. They've got these great restaurants, and there's museums and art
yeah,
galleries and everything. And I'm like,
yeah.
okay. They stayed at this
What?
cute hotel, and it's like, yeah.
Well, I see the guys, and this is typical. I'm not putting it down, but it's like you see the guys with the polo shirts, the 3/4 button ups with the sweater
Oh
tied
no,
around
you
the
don't see that,
neck.
do you?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. And you see them wearing the loafers with no socks and shorts, and I mean, it's quite the scene. I mean, it's especially on the weekends, and it's just I don't know. I mean, I know all the old places where I used to hang out, and me and my friends would hang out, or because I would like one or like on the weekends, like at 1 or 2 in the morning, I would just get on my bike and ride around town all all night, and it was now it's I don't know, man. It's just a weird. It's just a different place. You know,
Well, you have what is it, John and Zeke's?
that's not. Yeah, that's. Wait, is it there? Yeah, it's where
That's in the square, isn't it?
it moved out of the square because they
Mm.
got pushed out because there's a new bar where John and Zeke's used to be. It's really fancy. It's got all wood. It's got one of those where the window used to be. Now it's a door that can open the whole wall, so now
Okay.
you can just kind of walk into the bar. But it's all like oak and the bartender's got like a bow tie and it's just really fancy.
Oh boy.
They got moved down the street to where the D what is it? D&D or I can't remember. There was another bar, and
Mm.
then they built their own bar on the north end of town, and so John and Zeke's moved into their old place, and then the other place like went out of business, and so now that is a paint store. So yeah, it's a lot of changes, man. They
Right.
got kicked out of the square. So,
Well,
anyways, yeah,
but yeah, they certainly change around. Was it and going to Hillsburg High was a bigger school than going to El Molino. Like I was at, that's a pretty small school.
El Molino, yeah,
Yeah, it's like at the height, I think there was a thousand students on the student body, and some of these Santa Rosa schools would have like 2,000,
oh
2,500,
yeah,
and there's 5 or 6 schools like that,
yeah,
and those are more. Um, the classrooms are more like what you would see in a Fast Times where,
mm,
um, yeah, I mean, it just that kind of older traditional style school where all our classrooms opened up. You opened the door to the classroom to go. You were outside. I mean, there
yeah,
wasn't any of this
yeah,
indoor
yeah,
2-story, nothing like
yeah,
that. They're almost all portable buildings. Yeah, but in Healdsburg, I think is similar.
yeah.
Healdsburg High is similar to that.
Yeah, the junior high used to be 2 stories. Well, because my whole family went to the junior high and high school in Nielsburg, and when my mom and a couple of my aunts and uncles, um, when they were in junior high, the junior high, which is down the street from the high school, was 2 stories. It was one of the big buildings that you would see in those like John Hughes movies.
Hmm.
And by the time I got there, it's 1 story, and and
But
yeah, it
they
was one
lost the
story.
story. They lost the
Yeah,
story.
yeah, they tore down the whole school and then
Oh,
they rebuilt. They
oh, I
rebuilt.
see.
Yeah. So yeah, that was. I was kind of wishing it was 2 stories. I've never been to a 2 story school. When I lived in San Francisco, that's all you have there is
Right.
these big buildings that are high schools and
My first
um.
experience with that was at the JC. Is going into
Oh
a
yeah,
2-story
yeah,
school building of any kind. Was at the
yeah,
JC.
yeah.
And it was, there's no
JC.
lockers.
Yeah,
Like, I never had that experience where there's rows of lockers and you have to dodge the bully if you're the picked on kid or you got to hang out in this area.
yeah.
This was just, you were opening it up and it was just a giant courtyard. So I
Right.
didn't have a lot of that experience of, walking through the halls of school like at Shermer High School in Shermer, Illinois, or
Yeah.
at Ridgemont High. You didn't. I didn't have any of that experience.
Yeah.
School spirit was still a thing, I think, for us. I don't know if it's. I've under from talking to friends, kids, and stuff. It's like I think a lot of that went away for a while, but I think it's coming back. From what I understand, that kids are you know, there's a lot more school pride than
Yeah. Yeah.
there was a window of time, and I don't know if it had to do with starting in '99 with like Columbine or anything, where people were just I don't know when the era of school shootings started. You don't get that feeling from watching these early '80s, mid '80s type
Yeah.
type movies. With the It reminded me watching this again. That I thought there's a couple movies that came to mind that where I feel definitely took inspiration from this. And the
Oh
first one,
yeah,
of course, was Dazed and Confused. I
yeah.
felt that Dazed and
It kind of
Confused was
goes
probably
into my next question. Yeah, to
okay.
get back into it. Go ahead.
And
Keep going.
the other one was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. In the Spicoli character, there's
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
things that he says where you're like, that's Bill. I mean,
yeah,
almost the same inflection. I mean, it's got to be where Keanu came up with that, super
yeah.
goofy, you know, he played Bill, or Bill was, yeah, so he played Ted, and Ted was kind of more just kind of happy go lucky, and Bill was kind of more the thinker of the two in that
I've
dynamic.
never seen those movies, really, to tell you the truth.
What?
Kill me. I
Yeah,
haven't
that's
seen Bill and Ted.
unacceptable. Unacceptable. Watch the first one, George Carlin. You'd love it.
Yeah.
I don't know how much it holds up, but it's good. That was a
All
fun
right.
one. You time traveling and what's not to like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But anyway, you were about to say something. I
Oh no, I was just about to kind of get back into the last of my questions or things
Yeah.
that I want to talk about, which were kind of like the movies, and you kind of touched on it. Was
Mhm.
what are some of the movies now or in the last 20 years or 30 years or so that kind of I know that no I know that they're not going to be as edgy as Fast Times was in that day. But I mean, what are some movies that now that are kind of the teen comedy movies, like
Mm.
that kind of infer a lot of what this movie was about?
Sure.
Like you
That's a
said,
good.
Dazed and Confused,
Yeah.
which I would put up there. I would even kind of say like Stranger Things kind of
Yeah.
alludes to the whole '80s, but
Right.
they're not as it's a whole different can of worms in that one. Mean Girls, I
Mean
don't know.
Girls. Oh yeah. Yep.
10 Things I Hate About You.
Yep.
Oh, Clueless, which was done by Amy
Clueless.
Heckerling, same
Oh.
director.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so which I think she kind of in Fast Times, it's a certain crew of people, and then Clueless is another certain. But I always feel like Clueless was kind of really safe. I kind of liken it to like the Terminator and Terminator Two, which I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I prefer the first one, the Terminator, because it's really gritty and lower budget, and they had to be a
Mhm.
little more creative, and it just comes off as it's supposed to, which is, it's about machines, it's about
Yeah.
uncaring. So it has that feeling to it, which I think T2 is like the kind of, it looks nicer.
Hmm.
The Terminator has feelings, or it kind of introduces feelings to it, that kind of thing. Um, so I think Clueless, you compare Clueless to Fast Times, and I think it's like, and it's a different age too. It's a
Right.
different era of movie. But I mean, I still would think. I mean, if you were to make a movie like Fast Times now, do you think it would be popular, or how could you do it,
Oh, that's a
and
good
who would you put
question.
in it? Yeah,
Hmm. Boy, that's a really good question. I don't
I
know
couldn't
how
think of.
I don't know
Yeah,
how I would do it. I don't know
because
that
you
it
would.
would be something that the I mean, it's got to. So what it's got to do is two things. It's got to appeal to not only the people who are of that age that are going through it, because that are in high school, and it's
Mhm.
also got to be something for the adults, because it's with an R rating and nudity. It's not
Yeah,
for kids. It's not a movie for
yeah,
kids.
right.
It's maybe about kids. You'd have to do like a freaks and geeks kind of thing. I think would be the way to
Oh
tackle
yeah, okay.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little like, I mean, something that's really transgressive in terms of the kind of topics of the day. I think back then, and something like The Exorcist in the '70s, the reason why that was so big and so kind of influential was because it never handled those topics in that kind of way before. And I think the same thing with Fast Times is that there are these subjects that were kind of taboo for teenagers to talk about,
Yeah.
and the way that they kind of approach those things, like, you can't really, sorry, there's a fly here, sorry, you
Hmm.
can't really approach those things because it's, we talk about it all, or it's in the news, or there's a presidential debate about it, or
Right.
abortion, and So
Right.
I mean, you would have to kind of, I don't know, try to
It's not going to
find
be a
something.
comedy. It's not going to be a comedy.
Right.
It would have to be like a Donnie Darko, where they're in high school, but it's this heavy duty stuff. I mean, I feel like the kid, they're, we had fire drills and we had, the occasional earthquake drill, but we didn't have active shooter drills.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know what that's like. And I just, the amount of pressure with, not only that, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have to have both an in-person uh, version of ourselves and an online version of ourselves or whatever. I mean, talk about
Yeah.
pressures if you're already awkward enough as you're trying
Yeah.
to figure out who you are, and then you have, your TikTok and is in your Instagram, and we didn't have any of those pressures. I mean, that just the amount of more pressure I think on the kids that are in high school today is far exceeds anything that we had to go through. I mean, without a doubt, and that's my opinion. They've got
Yeah.
more pressure on them at this point.
Yeah. I mean, because we touched on it a little bit. It's like, kids these days, and I hate to sound like the old boomer, but kids nowadays they don't go outside and play. There's last summer there was these kids that there's family that moved in a couple condos down, and they had kids, and in front of the one I live in, that's the only place where there's a patch of grass,
Mm-hmm.
and so they would come um, all afternoon and just play on that patch of grass, and then they would just go home. And I kept thinking to myself, like, we have there's a junior high that's like 2 blocks away that has like three big, it has just an open field, and it has two softball fields, and then in the back it has a football field and a track. And it's like, in my day, we'd get on our bikes and ride over to that park.
Yeah,
We wouldn't just stay in this little thing and play. And
yeah,
so that, I think that's the difference now in these days, is that you have all these other issues, like predatory people and
right,
creepy people and all that kind of stuff. And it's just because there were some kids that were playing at that same park. It was 2 or 3 in the morning, granted, but and some gang members pulled up and shot him. So it's like this whole thing of guns, and that's a whole nother argument. But it's
right,
just guns and all that gang stuff. And it's just, it kind of, and then with the internet, it kind of packs everything into, like Chris Walk was saying, you can play from here to there, and, and that's it,
right.
and that's how you socialize now, is through your phone, or
Yeah,
and so yeah.
right. That's. I mean, we used to. I mean, no phone, no watch. Oh, just gone all day, and then when the street lights come on, that's when you go
Yeah.
home for dinner. We
Yeah.
would drive, as all summer would be get on our bikes. We used to play Forceville tag. That's how small the town is
Holy shit.
you have a half hour and somebody would go off on their bike or everybody would go scatter around, and then you
Uh-huh.
you would stay back on First Street and you would wait for like 10 minutes, and then you get on your bike and you just have to ride around town until you saw one of them. The thing was, you had to kind of keep moving. You couldn't just get behind a bush. And but they could either be down at the elementary school, they might be at the high school, they might be at the youth park with where all they could be down by the auto, the garage, they could be down, by the fire
Yeah.
station. I mean, and just all day long doing that. Never had a sip of water. Yeah, I've been almost drank this whole thing of water. And like I get in
Yeah.
the car now, and we never drank any water, right? Maybe
No.
from the hose, but there was, you would just ride around. And now it's like if I'm going down to the store I'll get in the car and be like, oh no, well, I can't go anywhere without. I need 32 ounces of liquid to come with me, then not take a sip of it. But now I'm
Right.
so used to that. Uh,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
uh,
old age,
yeah,
or older age. I
older
mean,
age,
now when someone says, "Hey, you want to go down to yeah, give me a minute," I have to go pee before I do anything.
right? It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's about every 45 minutes these days. So yeah, just hang
I
on. You'll hear it.
remember when I was in high school, I would ask my uncle, "Hey, can you drive me to the movies?" And he'd be like, "Yeah." And the first thing he would do is go to the bathroom, and I would always wonder, like, why does he has? Why does he just? I don't understand that. Now I understand
Right.
it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, cool, man. Right on. What'd you
Good one.
think?
Good
Yeah.
talk. Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. I'm glad we didn't just drill down on Spicoli the whole time. We could have been doing Spicoli lines the whole time. But this was, I feel like we've solved all the world's problems with this one.
Oh, of course,
Some of our
as
better
we always
work.
do.
Some of our
Yeah.
better work.
All right. Well, hey, thanks, Toby. And
Thanks.
yeah, I'll see you again soon.
See you next
All
week.
right.